Alrighty guys, full transparency, this is actually the second time I'm recording this segment because I recorded the segment first when the initial news dropped, and for those of you who have been following the story, you guys probably know what I'm talking about, but then a couple more updates came out later on in the week and I decided it would be best to just, give a more comprehensive picture of what's going on. I don't think the second interview with Kathleen Kennedy, or I should say the second wave of news with the interview with Kathleen Kennedy, substantially changed my thoughts on the whole situation. And really, I think the interview with Kathleen Kennedy more so was her saying, or giving clarification rather than her saying, no, that's not happening. But we'll talk about that in just a second. So for those of you who have been following the saga of Star Wars, first of all, just for major background context, in 2014, I want to say, or maybe 2012, I think 2012 was when Lucasfilm was officially sold to Disney. And that's when George Lucas said, I'm done. And he was like, here, have Star Wars, I'm gone. But an interesting thing he did was appoint his successor, because his successor would be the person running Lucasfilm, running the movies, and then eventually the television shows and whatnot. And the person he picked was longtime Hollywood producer, legendary Hollywood producer, who worked with Steven Spielberg, extensively, and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are good friends. But she has produced some of the greatest films of all time, and that would be Kathleen Kennedy. So she took over Lucasfilm. She revived the Star Wars franchise by launching the sequel trilogy. Force Awakens made over $2 billion. Rogue One made $1 billion. Last Jedi made $1 billion, but was divisive. And then we get into the solos, The Rise of Skywalkers. And then by that point, we launched Mandalorian, which was very successful on Disney+. But then it just starts to spiral into some kind of mediocrity. And I maintain that as we look at the tenure of Kathleen Kennedy, and it will come to an end, regardless of if it's this year or next year or in 10 years or whatever. It will come to an end, as all things do. As we look at the tenure of Kathleen Kennedy, as we sit here in February or March of 2025, depending on when you're listening to this, I guess it would be March when it's coming out. I'm recording this in February, but in March. Anyways, when we think about the tenure of Kathleen Kennedy, I think that there is first of all, there's a group of people who just want to hate on her. There's such vitriol and anger and hatred, and in my opinion, there's just no place for any of that kind of behavior. It's just really breaking down a person because they did something that you didn't like. And that is what it is. That's life. People do things you don't like, and it's not pleasant, right? Like if a Star Wars movie came out that personally, really cut to the core for me, and I just so disappointed me and that's what Last Jedi was for some people. And I totally understand that. I'm somebody who loves Last Jedi, but I totally get that. I would be disappointed. But then to turn that anger and hatred towards Kathleen Kennedy, towards a human being, is just, to me, it's unacceptable. So there's that group of people. But there's the other group of people that I would also push back on a little bit. That says Kathleen Kennedy, and again, not being hateful, but would say Kathleen Kennedy's tenure at Lucasfilm is an abject failure. And I tend to push back on that because, like I just gave the context for, the movies themselves have been very successful for the most part. Monetarily, except for Solo. Solo is a glaring hole in that. But yes, monetarily, they have been. But if you want to look past the money, critically, Force Awakens was received pretty well. Rogue One, very well. And everyone seems to want to revise history. The Last Jedi, critically, because it's one thing, and we can talk about her failures to unite the fandom and whatnot and whatever. Critically, The Last Jedi was received very well. Rise of Skywalker, not so much. Solo, pretty well. So, and The Mandalorian, and she had some other successes like Andor, obviously. I think Skeleton Crew, which again, if we're gonna criticize her, we're gonna give her praise as well. Skeleton Crew was a huge success. But of course, Obi-Wan, Book of Boba Fett, The Acolyte, and yes, Rise of Skywalker and Solo. Things have not been smooth. So earlier in the week, it was reported that Kathleen Kennedy would be stepping down, or rather would be retiring at the end of this year. And the assumption, obviously, is retiring from Lucasfilm. And in that article, it was a reporter who got it from a source, and then all the major outlets broke that story and said, yep, that's what's going to happen. Kathleen Kennedy is looking to retire at the end of 2025. And at the time, I think we all conflated two things: Kathleen Kennedy retiring and Kathleen Kennedy stepping down from Lucasfilm. Because those two things, it's like if Kathleen Kennedy retires, she steps down from Lucasfilm. But if she steps down from Lucasfilm, I don't think a lot of us considered the idea that she wouldn't be retiring. So that was the original news. That was the original segment, right? That was what I originally talked about. But then, later on in the week, Kathleen Kennedy actually gave an interview with Deadline where she actually talked about it. And the interviewer straight up asked her, are you going to retire? And she said, I'm not going to retire. So I've read through the interview, and it's interesting because it seems very PR speak in some senses, but it also seems very honest in others. And so it's hard for me to parse through what she's just saying to kind of quell the storm of media and all these things that are coming out about Kathleen Kennedy retiring, who's her replacement going to be? Because she was very honest, too, about the fact that they have been making a succession plan for who's going to take over her position, who's going to take over the role of head of Lucasfilm for a few years now. And she says she's been in lockstep with Bob Iger and Alan Horn in that regard. So when asked about the succession plan, she says, yes, that's very much up in the air. But when asked if she's going to retire, she said, it's my decision. I'm going to do it when I'm going to do it. And I believe the interviewer asked her, could that be this year? To which she responded, it's up to me. It's my decision. And what she did say, I believe, is that while, stepping down from Lucasfilm, whatnot, she said, I think pretty emphatically, she's not retiring. Because her job, first and foremost, before being president of Lucasfilm, was producing movies. And if that's what she loves to do, and if that's what she wants to continue to do, then more power to her. And so I think, right, because originally, again, I just wanted to re-record this to bring more clarity to the situation. But I think my original analysis, my original takes on this, when this news first came out, still stands. I don't think this really, takes the wind out of the sails of the idea that whoever replaces Kathleen Kennedy, it could happen, or at least the announcement could happen this year, and the plans could be set in motion at the end of this year, right? I think what she's saying is, I'm not leaving, right? Because I think it's fair to say, when you look at that kind of news, those kinds of headlines that are coming out about you and whatnot, you want to set the record straight. You want to be like, look, I'm not retiring. I'm not done. But again, she was very honest in saying, we have a succession plan in place. So do I think that Kathleen Kennedy is going to step down at the end of this year? I don't know. But I do think that the plans are in motion, and she's confirmed as much in those interviews. Whoever it's going to be, I feel like it's not a great exercise for us to speculate, because honestly, the best thing might be for it to be just someone unknown. Who knew about Peter Safran before he took over on the business side? Because Kathleen Kennedy is not the creative head of Lucasfilm. She's the business head of Lucasfilm. And she makes creative decisions in terms of greenlighting projects, but she's not like James Gunn. So who heard of, Peter Safran? Who heard of Kevin Feige before the MCU started? So I think, honestly, the idea of Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau, creative heads, maybe. But in general, I don't know. I don't think so. So we'll have to see how this situation evolves, but I think it's an interesting one, and I think we'll be looking for this towards the end of the year. Guys, what do you think about this whole situation? Do you think Kathleen Kennedy is going to retire at the end of this year? And by retire, I mean, I should say, because using her words, is she going to step down from Lucasfilm at the end of this year, or do you think that she's going to continue staying on through the next year or so? Let me know in the comments down below.